going to sit on the end there.
Well, good evening. First of all, I'd like to thank you for inviting me along here this evening. The way in which we normally do these things is I'll tell you a very brief outline about the RNLI and how it works, and then about the history of the Rhyl station, what we've got at Rhyl at the moment and what we hope is going to be our future. As I say, we did try at one time to bring stuff along, the kits that we wear, photographs and so on, but it is a lot of gear. So we found the best way is to invite you at some point which is mutually agreeable. House where we can show you the station, the boats. A lot of the history of the station is recorded in some lovely old photographs there, so that seems the best way to do it, and you can have a cup of tea and a cup of coffee with us and generally have a look around, so perhaps we can arrange that at some point for the summer. It's a bit of a cold spot in the winter, so it's a cold spot now. Right, well, the RNLI, as many of you will already know, is the Royal National Lifeboat Institution. It was formed in the mid-1850s, and it is still supported entirely by voluntary contributions. We get nothing from the government, nothing from the lottery. Every penny that we have that puts boats in the water and keeps the organisation going is voluntarily given up. They did try to put it under government rule in the late 60s when we lost a couple of boats with complete crews, because it was said by the governments at that time that something must be radically wrong, but we've resisted it and we seem to have been okay up to now. So we hope it's going to continue in the same vein. Well, we've had a lifeboat station in Rhyl since 1852. When it first started, it was under the auspices of the Shipwrecked Mariners Society, which was the forerunner of the RNLI, and it was taken over officially by the RNLI in 1854. But unfortunately in 1853 we had a disaster at Rhyl, which has happened at a great many lifeboat stations throughout the country during their history. The boat was returning from a call out down to the West Hoyle Bank, which is a large area of sand off the mouth of the Dee, and she was capsized in the surf not far from the boathouse. 6 of the crew of 9 lost their lives. 3 of them are buried in Rydlan churchyard. One of the graves is still visible today. It's marked as being David George, a lifeboatman, with the date of 1853 on it. And we tend to pop up at Christmas and put flowers on it to sort of keep things going. Just as a matter of interest, that is the only marker. But some of the young lads on the crew this year, led by my lad, have decided that it's time there was a proper marker put up in Rhyl. So what they're proposing to do at the end of July is to row an open boat from the harbour in Rhyl to the Great Orme and back, get sponsorship for it, and then the local college, Llangrilllo, has agreed as part of a project for its students to do a design and also to construct a memorial that will be sited on the prom to the 6 lads that lost their lives, because we feel as a seaside town and a maritime community that there should be something there to mark their passing. So that's something we hope perhaps yourselves might help us along with and get interested in. Anyway, the first boat we had in Rhyl was the Gwilym Moor, the Seagull, and she was a conventionally shaped boat, rowed 10 oars and a coxswain. She was replaced in 1856 by the Morgan, and this was the first of a quite radically different design of lifeboat. They were made of 2 tubes and were commonly known by the nickname of banana boats. In virtue of the fact they really looked like 2 bananas. They were joined at each end, tapering tubes, spread in the middle with a deck between them, and they were seen really as being the most suitable boat for launching into surf and operating off an open beach, which is what we have at Rhyl. The boathouse at that time was sited pretty near where it is today. So the first of the banana boats was the Morgan, and she served in Rhyl until 1878. Now it's a mark really of how busy Rhyl was in those days, I suppose, as a fishing and a commerce port, that they decided to site a second lifeboat in Rhyl at the same time, so we would have a choice of 2 boats. And the second boat, the Jane Dalton, was sighted at a boathouse in the river, which was just upstream of where the toll house is now. I suppose most people know where the toll house is, which was the western end of the old original trestle bridge that crossed the river. The boathouse there survived for many years, eventually been taken over by a builder, and it was used as his store shed. And then about 20 years ago, when it finally sort of succumbed to the elements, it was knocked down. But over the doorway of that boathouse was a large stone tablet about 5 feet tall, commemorating the fact that the funds for the boathouse were donated by a particular person. And luckily the builder kept this stone in his garden, and when we had the new boathouse built in 2002, he got in touch with us and he said that he would like the tablet to go to the new boathouse if it could be built in. So it is actually built into the inside wall, just inside the front doors. It was taken away and the lettering was redressed by Chester Masonry to sort of bring it up to spec. But it's a nice piece of history sited in the present boathouse from something quite a long time ago. The second banana boat, the Caroline Richardson, came to us in 1893, and she again was the same sort of design, but the tubes this time were made of iron, tapering iron tubes, and there were two decks, a lower one where the crew put their feet and the upper one which formed the seats that the crew sat on. Now when these boats launched into the surf, if there was any kind of sea running, the lads who were on it got wet with the first wave and they stayed that way. I mean, there was no shelter. The gear they wore then was nothing like the gear we wear now. You know, it's probably not as good as the gear you would go out in on a rainy day going to the shops. So, I mean, they were all fishermen, so they were tough men in their own right. It's slightly different now. We nearly had a mutiny on the boat the other week when we ran out of sugar for the coffee machine. A different breed. But, Caroline Richardson stayed at the station till 1997, and she was replaced by Caroline Richardson II. And she still has the distinction of being the longest serving lifeboat in the RNLI fleet ever, because she stayed at the station till 1939. And I always think, no matter how many times I give this talk, I always think that by 1939 you would have thought every boat, especially a life-saving boat, would have had an engine. But it was still rowed or sailed. It was still launched by a team of horses. In the latter couple of years a tractor was employed, but most of the time it was launched by horses, and it was still rowed or sailed out to do the rescue. So this is way after the first, well, right at the start of the Second World War, isn't it? So quite incredible really. The station on the harbour only lasted about 5 years before it was shut, due to the fact that the boat from there could only be launched when the tide was in. So it didn't have a very long life, only 2 boats served there. So I say the Caroline Richardson stayed till 1939, and then the first of the motor lifeboats, the Gordon Warren, came. For a time she was also quite a radical design, that she didn't have propellers. She had what is probably called now a jet boat sort of driving. Water was sucked in at the front of the boat into 2 tubes, speeded up by the engines and blown out of the back, more or less a very primitive form of jet propulsion, which again was seen as being the best type of boat to have operating off an open beach. I mean, part of the problem we have at Rhyl is that unlike the boats such as Moylborough, where they knock a pin out and slide down a slipway, or the boats at Holyhead where they're tied alongside a pontoon and they step aboard, we have quite an involved method of launching and recovering the boat, especially launching where you're under at times a great deal of pressure. And because of the beach at Rhyl being an undulating beach with lots of gullies and sandbanks, you really have to have your thinking cap on more or less on the way to the boathouse. Once your pager goes off and you set off, you're thinking already as you head down, what time was high water, what's the weather like, which way's the wind blowing, and from that, by the time you arrive there, hopefully if you're in charge, you've got a picture of roughly the spot on the beach where you want to launch. Because part of the problem you have is if you launch, especially in calm weather, you can have a deep gully, and once the water's about 5 feet deep in that gully, the tractor can't push the boat and carriage across, because the boat picks the carriage up. It's fastened to the boat, fastened to the carriage. It lifts the carriage off the seabed and the tractor can't steer it. But beyond that deep gully you might have a sandbank, with only 2 foot of water over it. So you can't get over that with the boat if you launch into the gully. And these are the problems that are going through your head on the way down. Where to launch and what part of the beach. Rough weather, it's better because the waves will help you to get over a shallow sandbar. Calm weather at night, flat calm, is the worst. I got stuck once during the time I was in charge on a bank. Launched into a gully because it was too deep to get across. Hit the bank on the other side and stuck fast. It wasn't at night, it wasn't dark, and there were about 2,000 people watching. You know it. So, at that time you feel very, very alone at the wheel. The rest of the crew have a knack of disappearing from sight. Totally on your own to sort it out. If you back into the gully and turn the boat round, it will go out over shallower water backwards. So that's the way that we learned to do it. But not a moment I wish to repeat in a hurry. The Gordon Warren stayed with us from 39 to 49, and then a boat, I suppose, possibly some of you might remember here, the Anthony Robert Marshall came to Rhyl. She was a very, very popular boat. She did a lot of work at Rhyl, a lot of rescues, a lot of lads trained on her, and she's probably the subject of one of the most well-remembered rescues within the lifeboat service in North Wales, where 2 youngsters in an inflatable boat set off from the beach in Prestatyn. Well, they didn't set off from the beach in Prestatyn, they were blown out to sea from the beach in Prestatyn. Disappeared out to seawards. Of course, in those days there was no mobile phones, so a telephone call from the nearest phone box alerted the crew. They launched the boat, headed down to Prestatyn. A strong offshore wind. There were no sign of these 2 youngsters. I think they were only about 7 and 10 years old. Anyway, the boat searched for a while inshore and then eventually decided that the only place they might be is out towards the Hoyle Banks, the offshore banks. By now the tide was flooding in, it was going dark, and it was seen really as a last ditch effort. So the boat set off, went out to the banks, and in the distance, beyond one of the far banks, could be seen 2 dots. And when one of the crew got the binoculars out, it was seen to be the eldest boy holding the youngest boy up above the water, almost on his shoulders. And the water on the eldest boy was up to his chest. So the boat headed at full speed towards them. The boats in them days, by the way, the top speed was 7.5 to 8 knots, which seemed very, very slow at the time, I suppose. Anyway, they got about 100 yards from the youngsters and went aground because the banks out there are very, very shallow. So anyway, a couple of the lads passing ropes on, jumped over the side and waded to them and got them just as the water reached the eldest boy's neck. So the Mullins brothers, they were called, and they were brought safely ashore, and it made quite a lot of press, I think, and did the station quite a lot of good. And for many, many years afterwards, even when the Mullins boys had their own children and grandchildren even, they used to bring them down to the boathouse on summer at weekends, you know, to sail alone. Some of the original crew off that boat are still come down to the boathouse with us. You know, mine of information. So. Where were we? Anthony Robert Marshall. Yeah, she finished with us in 1968. Just before she finished, the inshore boats arrived. It was seen with the huge explosion in the leisure industry and the way people were now taking to the water on all kinds of small craft, canoes, small sailing boats, the infamous lilos and so on. The launching a big boat involving 7 or 8 crew, the tractor and a large number of shore helpers was seen as a lot of work for sometimes jobs that were within 100 yards of the station. And this wasn't just happening here, of course, it was happening all around the country. So what they decided was a small boat, very, very fast, very, very light, that could be crewed by a couple of chaps and launched by one man on a small tractor would be a good idea. And so the inshore lifeboat was born. The first one came to us in '67, and I think up to date they've been recorded at Rhyl in saving over 500 lives on its own. The boat we have now, obviously, compared with that boat, has moved on quite considerably. There's probably more complex navigation and radio gear on this boat than there was on an offshore lifeboat 20 years ago. The boat we have at the moment costs somewhere in the region of £80,000, the small one. It's not light anymore, you can't drag it anywhere. you know, that has gone by the board. The engine has become more powerful. We're up to a 50 horsepower engine now, which is the biggest engine you can steer with a tiller. And it is essentially a young man's boat or a young woman's boat. We have 2 women crew at Rill now, a mother and a daughter, so I've got to be careful what I say. But if you go out in one of them in choppy conditions for 2 or 3 hours, you don't generally feel it when you get out of the boat, because you're still quite high on adrenaline from whatever's going on. But the next morning when you wake up, boy, do you feel it then. You feel like you've been run over by a train. So the age limit for the inshore boat is 10 years younger than the offshore boat, and for good reason. Yeah, in 1968 the Harlil came to the station. She was an Oakley class lifeboat, and she stayed with us till 1990. That's the boat that I started my lifeboat service on, and she was basically an open boat. There was cover for the coxswain, helmsman and the radar operator, but other than that you stayed on deck. You still got wet when it launched into a rough sea, and you still stayed wet. Basically you stayed on the deck. And there were times when we went to yachts that had broken down or were in trouble, where the people were in the wheelhouse, where when you arrived they were in better condition than you were, really. You know, they were sat down below making a cup of tea and eating eggs and bacon while you were like hanging on for dear life and getting half drowned, but it was all sort of part of the fun. The boats during this period changed quite a bit from when they first came. As different technology became available, the boats were taken back from refit on a regular basis, and came back with various aids. We had better radios, we had radar was put on the boat, the wheelhouse was more enclosed, all sorts of things that sort of advanced our cause really were incorporated into the boats when they came back. She was still only capable of about 8 knots, so it was still quite a slow boat, but the Oakley class especially were magnificent sea boats that go practically through anything. They were terrific in bad weather. So she stayed with us till 1990, and at that point we were pretty near to the point that we're at now, in that a new class of boat was coming out. The fast carriage boat, it was called in those days, was coming out, and everybody was vying for one. But of course when you take the speed of a boat up from 8 knots to 16 or 17 knots, logically you don't need as many, and so everybody was fighting to get a new one. We knew Llandudno were going to get one, and we knew Hoylake were going to get one. There are stations, offshore stations each side, and we fought a very long hard campaign to try and make sure that we got one at Rill, and luckily we were successful, and we ended up with the Mersey class lifeboat that we've got now. She's actually 20 years old next month. The 22nd of next month she came to Rill 20 years ago. The step up in technology from the old boat to this one was phenomenal. The inside of this boat, as you will see when you come to see us, bears more resemblance to the flight deck of Concorde than to a boat. People sometimes assume when they come on board that there's going to be half a dozen seats and a steering wheel and maybe a radio set. It's full of kit. But like all kit, there's some you use all the time, there's some you don't use very much, and there's some that I don't think we've ever used. You know, and again, stuff is put on the boat as it becomes available, but other stuff is taken off the boat as well, if it's found that over the course of years of development and practice that it's not being used, or the maintenance costs on it are too high. So the boat has changed quite appreciably over the last 20 years. It's not gone any faster. The more kit they put on it, the slightly slower it gets. So when we stepped up from the 8 knot boat to the 16 knot boat, initially you found it very, very fast, but within a month you were still trying to push the throttles in through the dashboard to get it going just that bit quicker, which didn't work. So yeah, so at the moment we've got the Mersey, and we've got what is now called the ILB1. And so the ILB1s, they work out at about 70 to 80,000 pound each. The Mersey, when it came to us, was £750,000. The boat that replaces it, which is now, it's just received its name, the Fast Carriage Boat 2 has become the Shannon class. They're all named after rivers, lifeboats. and they're working out at about 1.5 million.
Oh,
But
gosh.
they are going back to jet drives. They're driven by water being brought into the boat, speeded up by the engines and fired out the back, but in much greater proportions and capacities than the old Gordon Warren. These boats are capable of about the 25 foot mark. So at the moment it's between us, Hoylake and Llandudno. We're quite well off in some ways because we already have a boathouse that one will fit into. Our boathouse, when it was built big enough to accommodate the new boat, and there'll be a complete new tractor and carriage and everything as well. Whereas Hoylake have had a new boathouse that just about fits, but Llandudno haven't. At the moment Llandudno has still got their boathouse, which is in the middle of town. It was built there originally so that the boat could be launched either at the North Shore or down at the West Shore by Deganwy. It's the cause of a lot of aggravation in Llandudno. I think the crew want a new boathouse. Mostyn Estates don't want to allow anybody to build anything on the prom. There are two big pressure groups, one for and one against. I won't say we're biased. So we're going to wait and see. Their boat is due for renewal before ours. So that does give them a slight edge, I suppose. Right, crew at Rill, we've got about 25 people on the station at the moment. The mechanic, or as he is now the coxswain mechanic, is the only full-time member. He's employed by the institution, both as a coxswain now and the mechanic. So as a mechanic he has to make sure that both the boats, both the carriages, and also the things that tow the carriages or move them about are up to spec and ready to go. At the moment now we have a Talus tractor, which is a 20-ton Caterpillar tractor. These are specially built just to launch this class of lifeboat. They're not an adaptation of any sort from another vehicle. They are built specifically for this task in Powys. We have a tracked Land Rover at the moment. That comes and goes. It comes and we break it and it goes, and we have something else. We did have a county, for those people who are agriculturally minded, a county tractor with four of the large wheels on it, and that was an absolutely ideal piece of kit for launching the small boat and towing the recovery trailer, but they wanted it somewhere else, and the RNLI have an annoying habit of taking things away for trials, and if the trials are successful they don't come back. So at the moment we've got a tracked Land Rover, which we'll see how it goes with that. And we also have an ordinary Land Rover which is used for duties such as going into town to pick up fuel for the boats and so on. In the years gone by, one of the lads would pop into town and fill 10 cans up and put them in the boot of the car or the back of the van, but of course with health and safety now all that sort of stuff's gone by the board. We have to, it's a pain in the neck to be quite honest now. So yeah, so I say 25 crew, the coxswain mechanic is full time, everybody else is a volunteer. We have a lifeboat operations manager who looks after the administration of the station and is the link between the crew and the RNLI. Our divisional base is up on the business park in St Asaph, which in some ways is lucky for us because we get to try out a lot of new kit that's perhaps experimental, and is also unlucky for us because they try out some absolute rubbish on us sometimes. We're just a bit too close for convenience. The rest of the crew are all on pager cover. You have a pager which travels with you everywhere. That's it. It's on the side of the bath when you're having a bath, it's at the side of the bed, it's in your pocket all the rest of the time. The only time you get rid of it is when you go on holiday. It's just like being let out of jail, to be honest, going on holiday. And that, any time that goes off, you read the screen. If it appertains to your boat, off you go. Sometimes it will say both boats, so that'll be something quite big generally. And off you trot down to the boathouse. When you get there, the coxswain will pick who he thinks are the best crew for that particular job. If it's a decent day and it's a routine search, no great urgency, it's possible he might take 2 or 3 of the relatively inexperienced crew members to give them some experience and some idea of what's going on. If it's a bad night, we went out, well, the crew went out to the coaster at Llandullas. We were actually at the boathouse at a crew meeting, and one of our lads is a traffic policeman. He was on the 55, and he phoned the boathouse, and he said, "Have you heard anything from Holyhead?" Holyhead are the Coast Guard station who coordinate the search and rescue in this area. He said, "Have Holyhead been in touch?" So he said, "Not yet. Why? What's the matter?" He said, "There's a coaster here." He said, "He's broadside on and he's coming ashore." He said, "He's not going to get past the jetty." So about 2 seconds after that, the phone went and the lads were off. And when they launched, it was about a force 8 and it went up to force 9, gusting 10 while they were out. So the coxswain on that particular occasion picked his most experienced crew. I mean, as it was, everybody more or less was at the boathouse. But if they're not, you might wait an extra 2 or 3 minutes to pick your best people, you know, if it's going to be a bad job. When you set off on these jobs, you never quite know. To start with, you get an idea of what's going on, but generally it only develops into detail as you sort of after you've launched and you're on your way. With that particular job, they were out for about 3.5 hours, and I think at the end, Holyhead said everybody could go home because the tide was dropping. The ship was still in one piece. They'd lifted 4 people off with one helicopter who'd had to come down from Scotland because the Bally ones had broken down, and then he'd stripped his winch cable, so another helicopter was on its way from Yorkshire. But it was seen really that the danger point for the crew anyway was past, and that the lifeboat crews could stand down and go home. The lifeboats at that particular place down there couldn't get anywhere near the coaster. The water was too shallow, and if anybody had got it wrong, you know, they'd have ended up on the concrete posts themselves. We went to one about 4 years ago that had lost engine power down on the coast. He was a bit further out, and we stood by him for about 5 hours in a very, very big sea. We were one side of him and Llandudno were the other side, and we were just about had the engines in gear, trickling forward, just stemming the worst of the seas, waiting to see if he could get power going. And Llandudno was swept by a wave that took the wipers and the aerials and everything off their boat. Just took the whole lot off. You know, so there's some idea of the power. Even the boats that we drive are very, very heavily engineered, you know, very much over the top as regards gear, but it still did a lot of damage, you know, just at slow speed. So the training we get now is a lot more, say, thorough. A lot more detail than we used to get. At one time you trained other people because somebody trained you, and that was about the basis of it really. But now with sort of liabilities and that coming on, we've had to go into more detailed training, and so we train people at our training sessions on a Tuesday and a Sunday. We have big motor caravans that come to the boathouse. They're big articulated wagons with specialist instructors, and they'll come to the boathouse and they'll spend perhaps 2 nights at our boathouse and 2 nights at Llandudno during the course of a week. And they deal with stuff like radar, communications, first aid, all that sort of stuff, navigation. And then they'll go on to another 2 stations, and they slowly work their way all the way around the coast, around the 232 stations that are in the RNLI giving this training. And then over and above that, then the crew also going on to headquarters in Poole on residential courses, because there is now a massive RNLI college down there which not only trains lifeboat crew, but if you're working sort of on offshore wind farms or something like that, your company can actually book you in on a course there to do stuff that's related to your job. I mean, the basic we get now, if somebody joins us, we give them about 3 or 4 months to make sure they know what they're getting into, especially commitment wise, because it's a lot more commitment than most people think when they join. So we give them a little bit of a breathing space till they realise what they're into, and then the first course they'll be sent on is the firefighting and sea survival course, which lasts 4 days in headquarters, and they'll do firefighting. We don't fight fires on other boats, we take the people off and let them burn. We're not trained to do that sort of thing. But they fight fires on their own boats, and they have simulated layouts of all the big boats where they can flood compartments, they can set fire to compartments, and you learn to use the gear that's on the boat to sort of fight the situation. And then they'll do the sea survival, which takes place in a large pool which has waves, helicopter soundtrack, a helicopter winchman, rain, blackouts, thunder and lightning, anything you can name. It's like watching a film with the cruel sea. And apparently about half the people that go, when they get into the life raft, are actually very badly seasick, because they keep you in the life raft for about 45 minutes. But the water temperature in this pool is up around the 70-degree mark. The college wasn't built when I did mine. We went to Fleetwood, which is the nautical college. They got a wave pool there now, but that wasn't built when I did mine either. And you did all the firefighting side of it, and then on the Friday morning they took you down to the dock at Fleetwood. And you kicked the life raft over the side in its canister, pulled the string and it inflated. And it was about a 15-foot drop to the water from where we were in these old ex-oil rig dry suits that were famous for leaking. And we figured if we jumped right, we'd land right alongside the life raft and crawl straight in practically without getting wet. And then the instructor blew a whistle, and an inflatable boat with an engine came round the corner and put a line on this life raft and towed it to the other end. So yeah, we thought we'd be smart and came unstuck in a big way. So these lads think they got it bad now, they should have tried it then. So that's it for the crew really. I mean, you work your way through. You start off as basically on deck crew. You find with all the technology that's down below, well, a lot of the computerised stuff and the global positioning system and all this sort of thing, you find that the youngsters are spot on with that, like diggling the switches with 2 fingers. You know, I used to stab at one, and the second one I stabbed wiped everything out, so I used to leave it alone, just go on the wheel. But you find that they struggle a little bit on the deck work, which is the more practical side. And so they work their way through. They can then go up to being navigators. On the small boat they go through a progression where they end up being helmsmen in charge. So when the small boat launches, you always have to have a helmsman in charge and 2 other crew. When the big boat launches, you have a coxswain, a mechanic. We've got a mechanic and 2 assistants. So you have to have a coxswain, a mechanic, and then you pick 5 other crew. So you don't know when you get into it how long you're going to be. I think the longest job we ever did on this boat was 25 hours. So that was for a chap and his son who had gone out from Colwyn Bay fishing. They'd been reported as overdue at tea time. So nothing much happened until 10 o'clock at night when they launched Llandudno, and then they launched us an hour later. And we actually found the father at 1 o'clock the next lunchtime. He was alive. He was floating with his waders fastened around the back of his neck as sort of water wings. Unfortunately his son was lost. But we stayed out till about 9 o'clock that night searching anyway. So as I say, you never quite know when you go what's involved. If you work for yourself, you lose quite a lot of money. Cause quite a lot of aggro with your customers. You know, halfway through a bathroom suite the pager goes off. I said, no bath tonight. But it amazes us really. We still get so many volunteers, and we are branching out now. We do beach life saving. The RNLI run a life saving team, beach lifeguards, but they're on a slightly different basis to us in that they are part funded by the RNLI and part funded by whichever council employs them. So they actually get a wage, and they work set hours, sort of from 9 till 5. Then after 5 o'clock, our lads look after it then for nothing. So, money-wise, we get, if I can remember, for a launch in the first 4 hours, we get £8. Not an hour. That's for the launch and the first 4 hours. And then if the job goes on for more than 4 hours, you get something like £1, 10p an hour after that. So not really going to make a huge amount of money being a lifeboatman. And even the full-time men don't get a particularly large wage considering the amount of responsibility, which is a £1 million boat and the six other people who are on it, you know, in a situation where you're going out when everybody else is coming back. Right, does anybody have anything they'd like to ask?
How long can you stay out for, you know, fuel-wise and everything else, or can you get refuelled while you're out there?
We carry just over a tonne of fuel, 1,088 litres of fuel. If we run flat out, that lasts us just over 9 hours. If we throttle back, as you would do on a surge, it lasts a lot longer. I mean, we did 2 jobs, one, I think it was 25 hours, and we refuelled twice. We came ashore once, went back to the boathouse, refuelled at the boathouse and relaunched. And the second time we refuelled, we were down the other end of the bay, so we went into Conway Marina. But on another job lasting 24 hours, we didn't refuel because the weather wasn't good and we were travelling at slow speed searching. In good weather, you can search a huge area because the visibility is good, you search a flat area. In waves, you've got to make sure that you don't end up in a trough at the same time as somebody you're looking for. So you have to travel quite a lot slower. Carry quite a lot of food, seven blokes, especially if they were just going to sit down for tea when the baby went off, and get through a lot of stuff.
You supply your own food.
Sorry?
Yeah,
No, they supply us with some
They do
stuff.
supply you.
They supply us with hot cans like this full of various stuff. You have to read the label because what's inside sometimes doesn't look quite like what it said on the label. And they're surrounded by a chemical, and you puncture the chemical with a nail and it heats the can up.
Oh.
We found in some cases drinking the chemical is better than the stuff in the middle. But we all members, we have
The Mersey
some
class,
corn.
Pete, I'm
Sorry?
sorry, the Mersey class, who builds the holes for them?
they're built in Isle of Wight in Cowes.
Oh, it's not, they're not like Fairy Marine or anything like that.
No, they're built
Specially built.
yeah. There's 2 types of Mersey. We've got what they call fibre reinforced composite. It's a fiberglass and Kevlar mix.
Right.
Llandudno have got an aluminium one because of the stony beach. The aluminium ones are very, very slightly faster, but they're a lot noisier. We do occasionally borrow one. If ours goes in for refit, you have a boat from the reserve fleet. I think the last one I went to, we had to go to Barmouth to pick it up. And we bought it back from Barmouth. That was an aluminium one. Fisherman's Friend 1233 was a number. And all the way back from Barmouth, which took us about 7 hours, you'd find a rattle and you'd stuff a bit of tissue in it, and then another rattle would start over there and you'd stick a bit of tissue. So we spent most of the trip trying to eliminate rattles and bangs and crashes.
Can I ask you, how do you know so much about the holes and things?
Well, we've been around the body for ever since I can remember, and I've known Pete for so many years. I've been to the lifeboat dozens and dozens of times. So
Yeah, your own boat,
yeah,
Yes?
yeah, that's.
Oh, very good.
But I've had great times. Remember Jim Pendleton, when we used to work on the prom, we used to spend a lot of time in the boathouse. You know.
All right, because you obviously knew what you were talking about. And sorry, Emlyn.
What year was it that you rescued those 2 boys, 2 brothers down the coast? About
Before
roughly
my
when?
time,
Was it
well, it was the Anthony Robert Marshall. It would be pre-68.
pre-68?
I think probably 64, 65s, somewhere around there. Because it would have been before the inshore boat came, and that came in 67. But inflatables still causes. I think the inshore boat went last year to a mother and 2 youngsters in 2. It wasn't even a boat. There were 2 rubber rings, and they were 1.5 miles out off Llandulus when they got to them, and that was at the end of October. Yeah, I mean the lads who travel on the inshore boat now have head cams because the RNLI are very, very big now on publicity with all the TV series now. You see Mayday and Rescue at the Beach and all this stuff. So, and there's some cracking film of this actual job where you can hear the lads on the boat. There's a bit of a bleep machine going a lot of the time. You hear the lads on the boat actually saying, what the hell is it? You know, I can't make it out. Is it people or what is it?
Can you
And they were
imagine?
incredulous when they arrived because these people, I think one had a wetsuit top on and the other a t-shirt and jeans. And they were, you know, like from here to the roundabout out to sea at the end of October. You can't honestly figure it out
It was a
sometimes.
crazy sailor a couple of years ago, wasn't it?
Didn't he go out several times without any...
Eric,
Yeah. So-
he's actually passed away last year, Eric Abbott. We went to him, I
Is
think
that
we had
no
him...
VAT? No VAT?
No VAT, plus VAT.
Plus VAT?
We had him 3 times, Llandudno had him once, Moylborough had him 3 times, and 2 of the Isle of Man boats had him twice each. But having said that, when you actually met the guy, it was impossible not to like him. He was...
Yeah.
He only ever got in trouble when he got within a mile of the beach. He said all over the Irish Sea without a problem. When he got to within a mile of where he was going, he came unstuck.
His boat's still in the bottom, isn't it?
It's just been sold. It's gone
Has
down
it?
to Barmouth, I think.
Right.
Went in the spring, yeah. Well, spring. Yeah. We're doing it on this year.
Were you asking Connie something about
The rockets.
flare?
Yeah, the rockets.
Yes.
We used to
You
hear
know the
about
maroon
it.
rockets for calling them?
Yeah, remember me mentioning health and safety?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We used to chase them when we were
We get the time we get the most stick every year is Remembrance Sunday, because we kept a secret hoard, and at the risk of getting in serious trouble with the institution, until we ran out of them, we still banged them off as Remembrance Sunday, because we thought it was something we should do. But unfortunately we've run out now, and we got a lot of stick last year from people saying, you know, there was a disgrace that we had no choice, we haven't got any more. But they were the point. They did stop them about 15 years ago because one hit a hotel window or something down south and pointed it the wrong way. And, there was such an outcry at that time because people were saying, we want to know when a lot of people call the lifeboat our lifeboat, even though they're not in the crew. It's the town's lifeboat, and a lot of people said, we want to know when our boat's out. We don't want to read about it 2 days later in the paper. We want to know
Well, everyone
when
used
the
to
lads
run,
go.
didn't they?
It makes, as an aside, it makes a great deal of money in the summer
To bring them in, I think.
Did you ever come and watch us practicing with the Coast Guard?
with the breeches buoy and
Oh
stuff like
my
that.
God.
Yeah.
That was Fred Carner's army, if you've ever seen. Talk about health and safety. They were firing a rocket over on Orton's Nose one day, and there used to be an old pillbox right at the end of Orton's Nose. Nobody been to look if there was anybody in it. And they fired the rocket with a line on it, and some Chinese lad came running out, he's holding his hands up like that. Oh, we're attacking him.
The white flag. I say we do very well for crew. You know, we're quite a large group of youngsters now. This is the youngsters who were supposed to be doing this row at the end of
Yeah,
July.
when are they doing it? End of
July,
July.
yeah. So I mean, a lot of the youngsters we've got now are on the flood rescue team, because the Iron Line now run a flood rescue service, and they were. Well, my lad was up in Cockermouth the other year. He was up there for 4 days working with the helicopters from Valley, because they have a special design of small boat that they take with them, and it's all based at St Asaph for this area. And
Was he with Prince William?
they're on sort of 40 minutes notice to go.
Was he working with Prince William?
It was before Prince William's
Oh,
time.
before.
And when I finished as coxswain, they kick you off when you're 60, you're suddenly overnight,
Oh.
physically and mentally, you're no longer capable.
Beyond.
And on my last exercise with a helicopter, we were rung up and asked could we do a helicopter exercise on a Wednesday night, because we're desperate to get some pilots processed, and they said, well, as it's your last exercise, you know, do you want to be the man in the water? They want to actually do a search for a man in the water. So I said, well, okay, you know. So I jumped over the side about 1.5 miles out, and then the big boat got a call to go to Colwyn Bay. So the little boat stayed about 1 mile away to keep an eye on me. It was bobbing up and down September time, so it was quite warm. And the helicopter came, the big boat came back and stayed about 1 mile away. The job had fizzled out. So the helicopter came, searched around for about a quarter of an hour, eventually spotted me, came over, winched me up, and I knew the guy on the winch wire you met before on exercises, and he said, I've heard over the radio, Pete, might be your last trip. So I said, it might be, yeah. Right, he said, where do you live? We'll go and have a look at your house, we'll have a bit of a tour. So they sit you in the door with a strap round the middle, with your legs dangling out, and they flew all round the back of Rhyl, and down to the river, back down the beach, and along the beach at low level, and dropped me back on the boat. You know, the expertise of these fellas is
Oh, yes.
absolutely fantastic. We are so lucky to have them so close.
Yes.
And we found out the day after the pilot was being assessed was William.
Really?
So my wife went out and ordered a hat. Because she reckoned if I hadn't have made it so easy for him to find me, he wouldn't have passed. He wouldn't have been able to afford to get married. So we warranted an invitation, but it never.
Very good. You said the government doesn't subsidise at all. Well, where do you get the money? Rely on donations?
Yeah.
Really?
Why don't you get anything off the lottery?
No.
We just don't.
That doesn't seem fair, does
I
it?
mean, I'm not sure what the actual figures are now. There are people who come round to do talks who've got all the figures, but the only figures I remember is they've worked it out, taking into account the cost of training, upkeep of the stations and the boats and all the other things. Every time the little boat launches, it costs £800. And every time the big one launches, it costs 6,000. So those are the only two figures that I can remember from some years. They've probably gone up now.
Where do the old boats end up? Do they third world countries or where?
The boats, the type of boats we got now, the big fast boats, they generally sell them on to other life-saving organisations. There's a lot of our boats went to New Zealand, various countries in South America bought some. Iceland have always been customers, so a lot of them have gone there. The Arons and the two biggest lifeboats we ever had, the Clyde class, both went to Iceland.
Where did the Harlil end up?
The Harlil is present up in Yorkshire somewhere. She went to South Wales and sat in a field and became very, very sad for many years. And then there's a huge lifeboat historical society. The people in it are absolute fanatics. And one of these guys has bought her because I know he bombards one of our lads on a weekly basis with emails about bits of kit for it and what did, you know.
Because that was it supplied or sponsored by a family, wasn't it?
They're all, to a certain extent, supplied by, yeah, they're either families or companies that buy them.
Is that where they get their names from?
Yeah.
Well, the one we got now is,
I was going to ask how did they get their names? How were they?
depends. I mean, Fisherman's Friend, which was a relief boat we had, was obviously sponsored by the company that make Fisherman's Friends, you know, cough sweets. The one we got now, Betty Cunningham and Lil Cunningham were two sisters who moved here during the war from Derby and were in the Land Army. And they always said they liked the area so much that when whichever one passed away first, there would be enough money donated to have a lifeboat at the closest station to Prestatyn. So Betty Cunningham was in her 80s when the boat was commissioned, and she came down. There was a big ceremony at the boathouse, and she actually went to sea for 20 minutes on the boat. She passed away a couple of years ago, but it's named after her sister Lil. Harlil was Harold and Lillian, the husband and wife, named after them. So,
Anything else? Cup of tea time?
Very good.
Going back as a child,
Go on.
as a child, by the Pleasure Beach, there was a mine with people who used to put coins in. I was just wondering where that went to.
I don't know if it was Coast Guard or lifeboat.
I think it was Coast Guard.
Yeah, because there was a Coast Guard hut there, wasn't there?
Yeah.
As well. All I remember is just
the
the
palace.
Yeah, because at one
That's
time
right,
they used to
yes.
fire the Maroons from down there, didn't they, for the Coast Guard. I can remember as a youngster being with my aunt here and Uncle Mick in a car down there when the Maroons went off, and we went on along the prom to watch the lifeboat go out.
Well, Glenda has asked us actually, you brought a little note last meeting about this rowing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Sponsorship,
there's a sponsor.
Yes.
yeah.
Do you have sponsorship sheets?
They
or-
will be coming out shortly. They've got a few details they've got to organise first.
Yeah.
The RNLI is a very strange organisation. We give it everything we can at times,
And then
but
it takes
sometimes
time.
it can be so awkward about things, and there are so many things we've got to fulfil because the lads want to do this role. You know, it's
Well, if and when you have one,
Yeah.
perhaps
will do.
we'll get in
Yeah.
touch and we can always
As
pass
I
it
say, the
around.
Real History Club are,
Yes.
you know, they'd said they'd give us as much
Do
support
something.
as they could,
Yes,
so it'd be
of
nice,
course.
yeah.
Yes.
It'd be good.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much
Thank
indeed.
you.
It's,
Yeah,
it's,
thank you.
uh,
Look forward to Doing it at the lifeboat station.
Right, shall we, do you want to decide
Weekday, weeknight.
a weeknight?
Anything except a Tuesday or the Friday.
So a Wednesday?
We have our meetings on a Wednesday, don't we?
No, especially the summertime, we'll be finishing, won't we?
Well, this is
Yeah,
our last
yeah, that's
night.
right, yeah.
Yes. So in June,
No, I mean, if people come on a Wednesday.
Yeah, so it's
like
available,
coming to
yes.
another meeting.
Monday or a Thursday's fine.
yes?
Just we have a training night on a Tuesday, so
Right, okay. Do you want to think about it and we'll,
Good idea.
yes?
Decide on the, yeah.
Those who want to go, you've all got my phone number. If you decide now, tonight, you let me
Yes.
know before we go,
Yeah.
and I'll take your name and get in touch with you when we
Yeah.
come to some decision. Can we have a date? Can we? I've got my.
Any night, isn't it? Thursday,
Wednesday night.
Wednesday, yeah.
Month's time.
Wednesday night.
You know, keep-
Yeah, yeah. I'll like a June meeting.
Yeah.
Second
Yeah,
Wednesday.
let's have a look.
Forget those
something to see then.
No, I-
we have a lot
that's
of
the
groups.
first.
We have about 4,000 children a year come
Yeah.
through the boathouse with school groups.
It's the 13th of June. Anybody superstitious?
No.
Look at your face. You're away.
Wednesday.
You're away all that week. I said it's for 2 weeks, yeah.
It's all right, you know, something
Oh, yeah. Right. Shall we have a think about it, and after you've had a cup of tea, let me know. And then we're going to start our AGM, because we'll do it as fast as we can. Right?
So
Believe
about like
me.
7 o'clock down the
Yeah.
courthouse. Yeah.
7 o'clock, yeah, so it's just the date we need
Okay.
to. Names, I'll get a piece of paper and you can come and
Quite a
put
few
your names
stairs,
on.
that's the only thing there is.
Few
No
stairs.
lift.
Few stairs.
Okay, we'll manage. Get you up, well, if you can make Liverpool to see the match last night on your crutches, you can make the lifeboat.
Water.
Oh, is that what you did? Yes.
Right, they've got winches in the boat, have you, all right?
Water and
Thank you very much indeed.
the craft is in there.